Hello and welcome to this episode of The Rest is Entertainment with me, Marina Hyde.
And me, Richard Osman. Hello, Marina.
Hello, Richard. And I'm so terribly sorry, but I'm just going to have to say that congratulations are in order to you. First of all, you are the biggest selling author of last year, and you are also getting an OBE.
And also for services to podcasting. And I was surprised because I thought, I'm amazed I've got one Marina hasn't. I guess, listen.
Yeah.
I guess the king listens and he has a favourite. It's not for services to podcast. I don't think anyone's ever got any sort of gong for services to podcasting. It won't be long.
No, it'll be moments. But I wish so many congratulations. And of course, you deserve everything that comes to you. I'm thrilled.
Oh, thank you. I always think you deserve everything that comes to you as a real double-edged sword. It's a really amazing thing to say to anyone. Do you know what? You deserve everything that comes to you.
Yeah, you deserve, and I'm fixing you with an eye when I say that. You deserve everything that is coming to you.
May you have the 2026 you deserve. So we're still apart.
Which we hate.
But what are we talking about today? Well,
we are going to talk about David Walliams, who has been dropped by HarperCollins, hugely successful children's author. And we're going to talk about that particular story and how it's played out and how it's sort of gone quiet, which I think is a very intriguing part of it too. We
waited a couple of weeks just to see what the fallout was. And thus far, there hasn't been any. So we'll talk about what that might signify.
We're also going to talk about national treasures, aren't we? Because we've had some polling done by our great friends at More in Common.
We will give you the absolute definitive list of who British people believe to be national treasures and in what order, and who would win certain elections if only fans of certain national treasures were allowed to vote. Walliams is not currently on that list, but plenty of people are. We are also going to talk about podcasts on TV, and there's lots of interesting deals in that space, including one not too far from home. It's a big thing for 2026. Yeah, a very big thing. So we'll begin with David Walliams, who's obviously the hugely successful children's author and television presenter and actor before, as we knew. He has been dropped by HarperCollins over alleged inappropriate behaviour with female staff members at HarperCollins. And The Telegraph ran a story about this. I should say, we have to say right at the very top of this, David Walliams denies all knowledge of this. It says none of the allegations were even put to him by HarperCollins in their investigation of this. I think it's sort of interesting because lots of stories or perceived stories about David Walliams have been chased for a very long time by all sorts of different outlets. And there are certain stories or certain kind of areas where people just say in all sorts of areas of public life, oh, this is an open secret. Everybody knows about this person and their behaviour. Again, I will say, he would say, well, where's the evidence? I've got masses of lawyers and all sorts of things. And I quite understand that, because unless you can stand it up, it's difficult to run any of those stories. But by way of background, I would say that he is by miles the biggest selling children's author in this country. Well, I'd say in his age group, he is. Julia Donaldson is exactly in his age group, which is a big age group, and he sells countless millions of books and has done for a very long time. So he's been a golden goose for HarperCollins. Often laid 2 eggs a year, because he would do 2 books a year. And I think in something like in 2018, I think he accounted for something like 44% of HarperCollins' entire children's book sales. HarperCollins were pushing his Santa and Son book, which is the book he's got out this Christmas. The Instagram account was pushing it all. And then suddenly, the next day, he was dropped. And there are so many questions about this. To go back to the Telegraph story, which came out, it's suggested there was inappropriate behaviour with female employees, that one had left HarperCollins after a 5-figure payout, that women employees were advised to either work in pairs and also to not visit his home. Again, he says none of these allegations were ever put to him, and that is interesting in itself, if true. And that he denies it all. But to me, that story is quite striking in lots of ways, Richard. First of all, there aren't
any anonymised accounts of those women, which I think is quite interesting. Often when you get a story like that, The Guardian's run all sorts of things. I don't know, as an example, let's say the Noel Clarke allegations, which I'm not saying are the same as these at all. But to give you an example, you have lots of anonymised voices of women, and people tend to not want to go on the record. But in that story, people were described as well-placed sources. So they've obviously spoken to people at HarperCollins, but we don't know if those were the women or the executives. But if they were the women, they have said, you can't even run my story as an anonymous story.
Yes, so the story is literally, there's one story, which is HarperCollins has dropped him, and these are the reasons it has dropped him. There's no investigating beyond that. There's no talking to people who might have been at the heart of the allegations. So it's a huge story, but it is one story and one story only, which is HarperCollins, under its new managing director, which also I know we'll get onto more, has dropped him. I assume he was at the end of a contract. So I think what they've actually said is, we are not going to publish any more books by you. And that's the only story we have so far, which is why we've waited a couple of weeks just to see if there was more to come. And thus far there hasn't been.
If something comes out just after we've finished editing this podcast,
then forgive us.
We will return with an update. But it's interesting. There's lots of interesting questions here. First of all, how do you handle the back catalogue of someone who you are no longer saying, I'm not going to publish any new books by, but as we say, he sells huge amounts of books. So I'm sure someone else may well publish him. You may find that other people will publish him, but I don't think any of these of the big ones. But how do you handle the back catalogue?
And in children's publishing, the back catalogue is incredibly lucrative, much more so than in adult. I mean, in adult publishing, if you've got, a classic if you've got Agatha Christie or if you've got, Jane Austen, then that's very valuable. But for children's authors, books published 5 years ago, 10 years ago are almost as valuable now as they were 5 years or 10 years ago. There's constant repeat business. So actually, that's a question I haven't seen discussed anywhere, but it's a huge question because those books are immensely lucrative for them because everyone's already earned out every penny they're ever going to earn out from that stuff. So every single book they sell, every single book that David has written over a very, very, very long period is pure profit for everybody and really, really, really good money. Publishers really are back catalogue houses, and children's books are one of the key drivers of that back catalogue. So David Walliams' work up to now is vastly more profitable than David Walliams' next book, however profitable that might be. Agreed.
And I think, that was, as we say, there have been all sorts of different rumours in television, in publishing, in whatever, for many years. And there's a certain sort of thing where people say, oh, something is an open secret. They often don't know what the open secret is in, but there's a sort of perception that there's an open secret about someone. And it's intriguing as to why it hasn't been covered. Well, I think that, first of all, as I would say as a journalist, these things are so-called open secrets are surprisingly difficult to stand up. They haven't got accounts from the women who are alleged to have been victims of difficult behaviour of one type or another. I would say that HarperCollins hasn't denied that story, and you haven't seen them say no. But I have to say I have some sympathy with those women's rather depressing alleged trade-off, because what the Telegraph story says is that as well as one 5-figure payoff, the internal solution to the alleged problems with David Walliams was that women should see him in pairs and not go to his house. Now, if that is true in 2024, that a corporation, or 2025, that a corporation put those measures in place, then, oh dear me, because I'm not quite sure who you're protecting there. It seems much more like you're protecting your very lucrative author than you are protecting your staff.
There is a much, much easier way of protecting your staff, which is to remove the source of the issues,
which is what they've just done finally.
Exactly, but that's the quickest and easiest way to do that, which for many years they didn't do.
Yes, and if that is true that they did that, and if it is true that what David Walliams says is that not one of these women's allegations has ever been put to me, this is what he says via his lawyers, then in my view, you don't have an internal investigation. You have what many other people would class as an internal cover-up, because that is not the proper way to run an investigation of anything, to say, see each other in pairs, don't go to his house, and we're not going to put the allegations to you, okay? So HarperCollins might say that, but that they didn't do that, but they haven't said that, have they? What they have said is, after careful consideration and under the leadership of its new CEO, HarperCollins UK has decided not to publish any more titles by David Walliams. That is very key, I think, that statement, under its new CEO, because Kate Elton is the new CEO of HarperCollins, but she came very unexpectedly in October to covering that position on an interim basis, because the former CEO of HarperCollins, Charlie Redmayne, left very, very suddenly in October. No reason was given. No comment on, and the press release had no comment on his time or achievements there. What you'd normally say, we thank him for his service, etc. He's decided to pursue other opportunities. But there are also suggestions that, and I have, from speaking to people inside publishing, that maybe at some point the Telegraph had to go to them with what they knew about this particular David Walliams story, which, as we say, is very, very contained. But if they'd had to approach them at any point, which they would have had to do in the writing of that story, then maybe that felt like, oh, hang on, this thing that everyone claims is an open secret. And I'm not saying that it's a true one or not, but it's certainly an alleged open secret. Maybe that's coming out, and maybe we have to now do something because it's finally about to break cover.
As you say, it's not really an omerta, because genuinely, as I say, Charlie Redmayne left just before the Frankfurt Book Fair, which is the gossipiest week in all of publishing. And so nobody came back from Frankfurt any closer to the truth of why he'd gone. He's made no comment. HarperCollins have made no comment. It seems to be that rarest of things, which is a secret well kept. And so it may just be coincidental that they've moved from a male CEO to a female CEO, and this story has surfaced at roughly the same time, and a different decision has been made about David Walliams' future. It might just have been that he'd reached the end of his contract, which meant that they could say, we're not publishing further books by him, and there's no lawsuit or anything like that to be got through, because you're allowed to let someone go at the end of their contract. So there's all sorts of things that it could be, and it's very unusual to come across a story when no one can quite tell you what it is. Even as you say, this open secret, there are certain people we've talked about on this podcast before where there are open secrets about, and you're desperate for it to come out, and it does come out, and you think, great, finally the law can take its course. This one, I'm not absolutely certain what the open secret is.
There's a sort of quality street of open secrets, all sorts of different things, and across, in television as well. To some degree, he had sort of been semi-cancelled from television, I would say, because in the Britain's Got Talent thing, he was recorded on mic, but obviously off air during the recording of it, making disparaging remarks about contestants. I think one pensioner got called the C word 3 times. There were sort of sexually suggestive things about a female contestant. Obviously not the kind of thing you hear on a family show.
Yeah, the C word was not codger.
No. He actually successfully sued Fremantle, who make Britain's Got Talent, for breach of his privacy and whatever, saying, he had a reasonable expectation that those comments wouldn't be made public. But anyway, whatever reason, he successfully brought them to a settlement with him where they apologised for the misuse of his moments, which he might reasonably regarded to be private or not to be aired at all. But after that, I noticed he was on the Would I Lie to You Christmas special.
Yeah, on Boxing Day.
Yeah, and they were a bit stuck there because, as we know, they filmed those things 6 months ago. In fact, there was a whole little riff about that. But I wonder, and he had very little airtime or things to do on that episode. And as we know, obviously they record much more than they need. And he was sort of, he was edited out of it, would you say? Well,
there was the accusation by people who were at that recording, which is a completely separate accusation, that he made 2 Nazi salutes in the course of a piece. And there's a piece in that with Helen George from Call the Midwife about I won't say if it's true or a lie, in case you haven't watched it, no spoilers, about she sprained her arm on Strictly by waving too much. So a lot of people were waving, and you can imagine at some point some Nazi salutes were made, which is not the greatest taste in the world, but those shows, you record for 2 hours. But like in exactly the same way with the recording from Britain's Got Talent, someone in the audience let this be known, talk to the papers. I think the papers are very, very keen to, or two things happening. The papers are very, very keen to pounce on any David Walliams stuff that they can stand up, stuff that did actually happen that they can write. I realise I've called him David Walliams a number of times here. That's what he started out as. It was David, and then there was another David Walliams at Equity, and so he came back from the Equity thing and said, "I've changed my name to David Walliams." He clearly did this in the Would I Lie to You special, and he clearly said the things he said on Britain's Got Talent. So that happens, but there's also a thing of a lot of people will have a lot of defenders in those situations, and if those things happen and lots of people immediately spring to their defence, it was fairly simple and innocent and was nothing to do with any other behaviour they've ever done. Nobody seemed to spring to his defence in either of those cases, which I always think is interesting, because lots of people make mistakes or, misjudge things in a studio, and usually a production team will sort of gather around and look after them, but not if they feel that maybe this person is fair game. Can I say, by the way, if this is frustrating for people listening, this is the problem with all of these. It's an open secret. It's this, it's that. You cannot say something that is against, if we said, "Oh, I heard this, I heard that, I heard this," that's against the law. If you can't prove anything, you immediately be taken to court, and that's the story.
And we should say that he famously has very, very litigious lawyers.
That's absolutely what lawyers are for, but you rely, and we talked about them before, on brilliant investigative journalists finding stuff that does stand up. You cannot go on a podcast, you cannot go on television and say, "I heard this. This is something I heard." If over a series of years you've heard the same things and 20 other people in different parts of the industry have heard the same things, that's when journalists start sniffing around, and that's when they look for something they can stand up, like HarperCollins dropping you this, and they go, "Okay, is this the one that opens the floodgates? Is this the one where we can start putting out feelers and discover stuff that people, for a million very good reasons, have not wanted to go public with? Or is there nothing?" So it's hard for us to discuss. It's hard for the culture to discuss.
Well, let's talk about those floodgates. Yeah, I think that's interesting that you say, okay, clearly that Telegraph story was written, and I would have thought they would have gone several times during the writing of that to HarperCollins. And as I say, none of it's been denied by HarperCollins. What you're hoping when you're a journalist in that situation is that's the first story you get out there, and then it's broken cover. And because of that, you get ring-ins, you get people saying, "Okay, I want to talk, I want to be anonymous, and by the way, there will be across all the newsrooms, except maybe less so the Times, because they're both owned by Rupert Murdoch, but they will now be trying to get a hold of further. They want to bring the story on. People forget that all stories start like that. From the most famous one ever, like Watergate, what can we get over the line? What's the first thing? And then you can end up running multiples of scores of stories on the same subject as more and more things happen. People will be continuing to dig on this, and they will be right now. I should say David Walliams denies all knowledge of this. It says none of the allegations were even put to him by HarperCollins in their investigation of this. Now, shall we go to a break? And we'll be on many lighter notes when we come back.
National treasures and so on. Welcome back, everybody. Now, we are talking about national treasures. It's a term often bandied about as often as open secrets, national treasures, but more fun. So we asked our good friends at More in Common, who've done lots of polling for us before, to definitively find out who in British entertainment is a national treasure. So we have the full results here. Now, I'm just going to, you know me, if I do a list, what do I always do? I go from 10 to 1 or 5 to 1 or 3 to 1. This is the one list where there's absolutely no need to do it, because
I don't even understand the rules anymore, but okay.
Listen, we asked a series of things about national treasures, people of different political persuasions, people of different ages, the whole country. Every single way we cut this, the same name is number one on every single list, every age, every region, every political persuasion. Number one on every list of people's national treasures is
David Attenborough. So I'm not worrying about number one. Number two is surprising to me in a wonderful way, in a happy way.
But here's the issue now, and this is, come on. So number two is where the interest starts. So we don't go to number two now.
You're right. Now I still don't understand the rules, do I?
So number two sort of becomes number one now, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Now,
okay.
There are only 7 people who got more than half the country saying they're a national treasure. There's only 7 people on that list, and not a single one of them is under 75 years old. So I think that's quite nice.
There is definitely in national treasuredom, national treasurehood, you need the longevity to it. That you have to feel that I think that's part of ours. We have to feel they're kind of morally reliable, and they have been over a period of time, because otherwise it doesn't really count. And you need all of those, and lots of different generations need to buy into them.
So we'll talk about political party breakdown and age breakdown and stuff in a moment, but I'm just going to do this top 7, or 7 to 2 anyway, because this is the Attenborough list. Number 7, Mary Berry. In her 90s, absolutely fair enough, national treasure. Number 6, Sir Trevor MacDonald. Number 5, Joanna Lumley. Number 4, Paul McCartney. Number 3, the youngest man in this top 7, the youngest man to have over 50% of the nation to think he's a national treasure, Elton John. And number 2, so behind Attenborough, who we know is unassailable and unimpeachable, number 2, national treasure, again, we go into the 90s, Dame Judi Dench.
Which I think is brilliant. To me, that shows you the value of doing a few really big commercial films. In her case, I don't think she'd be on that list without Bond, because however much I absolutely adore and revere Judi Dench, she is almost above all a theatre actress, but she would do various films. But I have to say that being M in those films, and being also, I think there is something significant about the role, that kind of benign but steely representation of the British state. There is something about that it's elided with her real personality and kicked her up right to number 2 in national treasuredom, which I think is quite interesting. I don't think you'd expect it.
Yes, and because I think the state of being a national treasure is that thing of everybody individually likes and respects that person, and then there has to be a lightning rod where everyone starts to recognise that everybody else likes and respects that person. As you say with Judi Dench, everyone already liked and respected her, and when she's M, then everyone suddenly sort of has the license to talk about her, and they all go, oh no, I love her too. And so something that already existed coalesces, and we all kind of go, okay, are we agreed? Yep, national treasure. Okay, there we go. That's a national treasure. And that feels to me what that is.
But also that national treasures have to represent, in our version of it, because it's different, culturally it's different in all sorts of countries. In Japan, it's all about sort of national preservation. In France, it's all cultural prestige. There's lots of different ways of looking at this. But I definitely think in the UK, a national treasure needs to represent something about our idealised sense of ourselves. Yeah. And they either reflect British values or British humour, or they're part of shared national memory in some cases. I think that with someone like Trevor MacDonald, they've kind of been there at those moments, quote unquote, and they're associated with those kind of key moments in public life. And good works is important, but it's interesting. I think with someone like Elton John, I mean, he has obviously done lots of good works, but you need to do both.
Yes.
But there is something peculiar about ours, which is particular, I think, to the UK, which is they've got to be still one of us, not showy.
Yes, exactly. 100%.
And actually, weirdly, I mean, do you remember when David Beckham, who was angling for a knighthood for a long time, and speaking of leaked comments in which people get called the C word, I think he actually called the Honours Committee unappreciative C words and said it was a disgrace he'd been snubbed.
Wow.
I think that was back then to do with kind of rumours about his tax affairs. But he has now been knighted, and I think people have a slightly different view. And I would say that a big part of what made people have that different view about David Beckham is one single incident, one thing he did was very one of us. He queued with all the ordinary people to see the late Queen Elizabeth II's lying in state. And he stood in that queue for 9 or 10 hours with all the ordinary people. Do you remember the famous queue?
Yeah.
And that was very much like, okay, from someone who, that was really a big part of his one of us-ing again, because once you've kind of spun out into the echelons of being the Beckhams, you're not, to some degree, you're not one of us, but he was able to become one of us again but with that one sort of gesture.
So Judi Dench gets on the list because she was M, and David Beckham gets on because of Q.
Yeah.
Now, talking of Beckham, so we've had our top 7 because they're the ones that more than half of the British people think are national treasures. But the rest of our top 10 is made up of David Beckham at number 10, Stephen Fry at number 9, and Michael Palin at number 8. So that entire top 10, I'm going to give you a quiz question in a minute. Every single one of them is a knight or a dame. Every single one of the top 10 has been either knighted or damed. What do they say for damed?
That does show that they're quite on the pulse, the Honours Committee. I think that's very interesting. They reflect people's feelings rather than have led them by giving them these honours. They've reflected actually very accurately how people feel about these people.
Who do you think, David Beckham, by the way, is 50, so there's no one under 50 in that top 10, but he's only just 50. Who do you think is the first person on the National Treasures list who is not a sir or a dame?
J.K. Rowling?
J.K. Rowling, absolutely right. The first person on the list at number 11 who is neither a knight or a dame, closely followed by, in fact, the same score, but they score lower on various different things, followed by Martin Lewis, money-saving expert, and Dawn French. So they're just bubbling under outside the top 10. Dawn French, 43% of people think Dawn French is a national treasure. Same as J.K. Rowling and Martin Lewis. Dawn French not only beats Jennifer Saunders, but she beats her ex-husband, Lenny Henry. They both got 39. The rest of the top 20, you get some slightly younger people. You got Emma Thompson, Olivia Colman, Hugh Grant is there. Ant and Dec we put in together because how can you not?
They have to exist together.
Exactly. And at the bottom of that top 20 was Peter Kay. And then just outside it, Adele, Ed Sheeran and Miriam Margolyes. A couple of little matchups. We put Clarkson on the list. We asked people if they thought Clarkson was a national treasure. And we also put Gary Lineker on that list and asked if people thought he was a national treasure. Who do you think won out of those two?
With which voters or with...
Overall.
Clarkson?
It was Clarkson. 34% of people think Clarkson is a national treasure. 29% of people think Gary Lineker is a national treasure, which is pretty good going, I would say.
Oh, you'll take it, yeah.
But those two people bring us on to politics. So if only people who think that certain people are national treasures were allowed to vote, who would win the election? See what you think about these two lists. So Conservatives, there's no scenario in which they win. Conservatives, Lib Dems, Green, there's no scenario in which they win. But Labour and Reform are sort of, they divvy up most of the rest of these national treasures. So Labour wins the election with fans of Gary Lineker, Gareth Southgate, Adele, Ed Sheeran, Claire Balding. Claire Balding is a very interesting bellwether because she's an almost exact three-way tie between Labour, Reform and Conservative. She's the only person she's within 1%, all three of those parties. Labour still wins with Nigella Lawson, with Jamie Oliver, with Stormzy. Labour wins with Simon Cowell by quite a lot. He's quite a heavy indicator of Labour voting.
Is he now?
Simon Cowell being a national treasure. Yeah. Alison Hammond, Claudia Winkleman, and Bob Mortimer. We end strong there.
Okay.
Reform would win the election with fans of Ant and Dec, J.K. Rowling, Mary Berry, Judi Dench, David Beckham by 1 point from Labour, Paul McCartney, Elton John, David Attenborough, all the big ones, Stephen Fry, and then you've got Jeremy Clarkson, Martin Lewis, Joanna Lumley and Michael Palin. So a lot of the top 10 there. A lot of the younger ones are Labour skewing. Almost all of the top 10 are Reform skewing. The person who gives the biggest swing to Green would be Alison Hammond. I know not why. And the person with the biggest skew to the Conservatives would be Jamie Oliver. The biggest reform skew is Clarkson and J.K. Rowling. They're the two biggest indicators of whether you would be a reform voter or not, would be a desire for Jeremy Clarkson and J.K. Rowling to have National Treasure status.
That's so interesting.
We also did, because you're allowed to say anyone on this list who's a National Treasure. So the final thing we asked is, you're only allowed to choose one. You can only choose one National Treasure. Okay, if everybody in Britain, there's just one, we're all going to agree there's one National Treasure. And that list is quite different. Number 5 on that list is David Beckham. Number 4 on that list is Joanna Lumley. Number 3 on that list, if you're only allowed to choose one National Treasure, everyone in Britain, Martin Lewis, money-saving expert. Number 2 on the list, Dame Judi Dench. Number 1 on the list, if we're only allowed one National Treasure,
I think we know.
we go out where we came in. Sir David Attenborough. 44% of people said if we only have one National Treasure, almost half of the people in Britain agree on the same person, and that is Sir David Attenborough. What a place to have.
Yeah, the only thing that half of the people in this country agree on.
But isn't that absolutely extraordinary? But thank you so much to More in Common. And you can see they're going to put full results and all the kind of details of all the voting on that. You can, if you go on X or Instagram and follow More in Common, you can see a lot more information about all of that. And we will link to all of that in our newsletter as well, all the facts and figures.
It's very important research.
Yeah.
Now, for our final item today, do you remember when the first day we ever recorded this podcast? And I think that you and I thought we were, you think you're in an audio medium. And Tony Pastor, one of Girlhanger's co-founders who was in the studio with us, said, yeah, just to let you know, we're going to do something. We're going to actually film this because we sort of think that people are starting to watch podcasts. And I'm thinking, oh my God, well, I'd have worn something different, etc. Okay. That now is only a little bit over 2 years ago. The phenomenon of people watching podcasts is so extreme now that I don't think we should really even call this a podcast any longer. And you have to sort of call it a show, for want of a better term. And you almost can't really call people listeners, because something like one recent survey found that 72% of podcast listeners prefer to watch it on video, and over much more than half of ours watch it rather than listen to it. And there's you can basically watch podcasts on three different platforms: YouTube, which is by far the most mature and popular; Spotify, which is obviously a big investor and player in podcasting; but most recently and most splashily, Netflix. It's all coming soon because podcasts are coming to Netflix. Now, they recently took a whole load of podcasts from The Ringer, Spotify Studios and The Ringer, who are American. They do Bill Simmons podcasts, a sporting podcast, lots of big sport ones, The Rewatchables, Good Hang with Amy Poehler, Serial Killers. But they're partnering with Netflix to bring podcasts to Netflix starting early in 2026. And now the rest of football will be going to Netflix for the period of the World Cup next summer, and they'll have a studio in New York and they'll broadcast daily. I must say to all those armchair media analysts who always thought they understood talent pay and that the BBC had spent years overpaying Gary Lineker, I wonder, do they think he's getting paid less by Netflix than he was paid in a year by the BBC? The answer might shock you if you're an idiot. But Netflix are really doing this. So behind the scenes, they're really going for this. They're making big offers for slates. They want to make originals. They want to break the dominance of YouTube. And they can do all of this primarily because podcasts have become video. And most of these popular podcasts are essentially chat shows, talk shows. They're a talking format, and people will, since the pandemic, since the rise of YouTube, people just simply will accept much, much lower production values. In
fact, they prefer it because that's what they want from a podcast. I mean, there's right. There's levels and limits, but anything you watch on TV comes with certain expectations. And if you watch a Saturday night TV show, your brain expects it to be a certain thing and look a certain way. And if you want to see Joe Rogan chatting for 3 hours, you expect that to look a completely different way. And for years and years, quiz shows were like this magic bullet for terrestrial television, because they were this thing that was cheap to make, that you could do in volume, and that people loved. And you're thinking, oh my God, it doesn't get any better than this. We can't, there's no way of making TV more popular and cheaper than this. And podcasts come along, and because they weren't supposed to be a visual medium, they were saying, oh no, this is just us talking in a room. So that's what people are used to. The first few come along and appear on screen, and people watch them, and they want to watch them. They want to watch three people talking in a room because it feels real, and it is real. And most importantly, it is what they expect. It's what their brain expects. And as soon as you start to watch them, you think, oh, we now have a thing that is usually twice, three times, four times the length of a quiz show, can be made for a tenth of the price of the quiz show, and that has an enormously loyal fan base. And everything that for years, the reason I loved making quiz shows was bang for buck was amazing. Value for money was amazing. And you could do something that you cared about and loved and give to people who enjoyed it and loved it at a price point that seemed to me a bit more reasonable for making television. Now podcasts are doing that, but it's ramped up, I was going to say times 10, but divided by 10. It's an extraordinary insight into human nature, psychology, why we watch, what we watch, when we watch it, and what we want from it. And it's come completely organically.
Yeah. Netflix's need to get into it, it's emblematic of lots of stories we often discuss. Netflix need to grow. And last year, they repeatedly had these situations where they would have these earnings calls, and they're widely perceived to have won the streaming wars, although have YouTube really? And they seem to be the emperors of all they survey. And then suddenly, they have these wonderful earnings calls, and they tell you all the great things they've done, and their share price drops 5% the next day, even after saying we're going to buy Warner's. And the reasons for that are sort of various, but investors now expect a huge amount from Netflix. It's because it has been so successful. So there's always the question, has it run out of steam? Where are its opportunities for growth? And once you've matured in lots of different markets, subscriber growth is much more of a challenge. But particularly, I think what they're interested in is consumption growth per user. So some analysts say, oh, people spend an hour a day with Netflix. Netflix say people spend 2 hours a day with us. But that is absolutely nothing, as we know, compared to what people used to spend with what we used to call, with linear TV. And actually what Netflix, having said, you can have anything you want and you can have it at the moment you want it. This is what streaming promised, that it was on demand and it was exactly when you wanted it. Actually, what they've realized is pretty beneficial is TV that you can sort of leave on, that companion thing that people used to have with linear TV. People do have that with podcasts. They might have it in the background while they're doing something else. They might be fully engaged with it, but you can keep people on the platform longer if you have this type of content, like, sort of friendly faces that they like, that they have these so-called parasocial relationships. Ted Sarandos said, who's the co-CEO of Netflix, said, the lines between podcasts and talk shows are getting very blurry. This is back in April. And as the popularity of video podcasts grows, I suspect you'll see some of them find their way to Netflix. Well, that is exactly what you're seeing. And part of the reason I think is very interesting is Netflix really want to be relevant to their audiences. They like that. They want immediacy. They want that creative vibe. And how many times have you and I said, what's fun about doing a podcast is immediacy? Like you can say, oh, I can just get this thing out there right now. The rest of television, as we know, takes a very long time to make. And it's very interesting, I think. Podcasts, Netflix have really shied away from the news business, but in the same way that they don't do sport until they do, they've shied away from the news business, but they love topicality, and podcasts give you that sort of news adjacent thing. You can be talking about things in the culture and in the news and whatever, but you're not sort of delivering news. You're not having journalists. You're not kind of having to cover every story. In the same way as with sport, what Netflix have done is, if you're CBS or one of those people in the States who are paying, tens of billions for the rights to various different sports, You don't have to buy the games rights. Maybe you could just have the cool after game podcast, or you could have the thing that, so you get that sense of sport or topicality or whatever it is, or news adjacent thing, but you're not having to buy the sort of rights to this or run a massive news organization. And I think that is particularly appealing to Netflix, who want to be in the culture, but not in those particular ways necessarily.
And also it's time spent on the platform. So one of the key things about most podcasts is they're like radio shows in that they're on all year round. And that's the point of it. There's always in any endeavor like this, a contract you make with viewers or listeners, which is, I will do this. And the contract you make on podcasts is, we will always be here. So if it becomes part of your routine, like if you're doing a quiz show, it will always be there. We will put in the work that this stuff is always there. And if you do that, if Netflix want to do 8 more episodes of The Diplomat, right, they're going to spend 70, 80, 100 million on that, and it will be absolutely brilliant, and it will be 8 hours long. If they buy a podcast, they got 8 hours a month for the next 10 years. It's nonstop, and it stays on their in their library. If Netflix had 6 hit podcasts, let's say those podcasts were doing 2 hours a week each, which is sort of normal for a lot of podcasts, then suddenly you've got 12 hours a week, every single week, of engagement with something which, apart from the upfront money you're paying, is quite cheap to produce, has an awful lot of viewer loyalty, has a topicality, which means you can talk about other Netflix shows, and you can talk about, there's all sorts of other little things you can do with it. And it's an enormous library that constantly keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. If you think of how much the Friends library is worth to Netflix, you think, well, if you had a podcast that was enormous, your library just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing and never stops growing. So you have the loyalty of people watching it every week, and then you have this enormous library of content that people love and that constantly keeps people on your platform.
Yes, I mean, I think it's interesting. This remains an experiment for them. Yeah. And if it doesn't work for whatever reason, then they will pull out of it. So what they will have done is that they will have, what some people would say, they've overpaid, although not in their eyes and maybe by other standards to get these slates. But they'll see it as good business, and I agree, because they are buying into the experiment at least. Remember, they did that to acquire scale in other areas. To attract filmmakers or writers or actors or whatever who didn't feel who weren't sure about this new entity, Netflix. They paid huge amounts of money and they gave masses of control, and creatives did come to them in the end. It's interesting that, and it's essential really, that the deal with the Ringer and Spotify and with Rest is Football is that you take your shows off YouTube in exchange for this.
I mean, that's what the money's for, right? Yeah,
that's what it is. Whether that will worry YouTube, to be honest, of course you're worried to some degree about losing your highest profile podcasters to Netflix because they've got very deep pockets. But I think that they probably don't need to care that much about it, because first of all, we don't know if it will work, and Netflix needs hundreds, maybe thousands of hours of high quality video podcasts to compete with YouTube. And so, having said that, it is interesting that they're going for it. And I do think that there's a big part of this idea of as we talk about like consumption growth of just trying to have something that again mirrors the old world of linear TV, where it's a form of companionship, or radio where it's on and you leave it on and it's with you in the background or in the foreground, whatever it is, but you have it on a lot more than you do now.
And on a philosophical point, whenever I have meetings now with TV companies about new ideas and things, it's constantly that thing of, does this need to be in a studio with a host talking to camera up front? Can it just be, boom, we're in a studio, someone's talking, everyone is starting to think, how do you take the podcast aesthetic and put that into regular linear TV as well? From my perspective, doing podcasts, it's lovely that people watch it. I get it. I absolutely understand it, because you have to use things however you choose to use them. It's never how I've ever approached it. I don't think of a visual medium in any way whatsoever. For me, every single thing is the words. It's immediacy, it's intimacy, and that's all it is. And you watch it, listen to it.
Yeah.
I genuinely couldn't care less, because I don't think it makes any difference to how a podcast is put together.
Although people say they like the expressions and they like to see,
Yes.
and I know people who say, oh, I actually, the first time I ever, watched Rest is Football on video, I was like, oh, now I'm hooked because I want to, or Smartless or one of those big US ones. They like to see the interaction.
But you mustn't think about it, because that's when people start not doing podcasts properly, because they start pretending that to do banter, and they're pretending to do their reactions and putting pranks on each other. And then it just becomes what television turned into, which is forced banter. And, that's the thing that must be left aside. But it's everything's going to look different. But yeah, the joy of this is just talking about stuff we find interesting and trying to do it intimately and immediately. And
that's the real benefit is that you get to be news adjacent in the same way you get to be sports adjacent, but you don't have to buy the rights and you don't have to run a newsroom. And actually, it's so many people now are coming to their news via the filtration medium of podcasts, which I think is sort of fascinating. And
it can only be good for democracy.
Well, yes, it is, as if it even needed a shot in the arm, Richard. But
yeah,
yes.
Exactly. It's already healthy.
And yeah, it's interesting within many, many news organizations now, everything is perceived as, you're suddenly thinking, we're just going to, how can we be a online print, I'm talking about, how can we be a words organization? We have to be a video organization. We have to almost go video first. And newsrooms of news, what was once newspapers, news outlets across the world are now thinking, to what extent can we sublimate our news stories into something that looks a bit more like a podcast or short form video or anything, because that is where everything is going. And if we just carry on writing this as just words or whatever, we can't do this anymore. So essentially we're delivering the same thing, but we're just doing it in a completely in a different format. And that is the shift that's happening across those kind of genres. Is news a genre? I don't know, but that's definitely the shift that's happening there as well. So everything is going towards this, relatively low production value. I mean, not even relative. I mean, hugely low production value.
Look at us.
Form of video. Look at us. I mean, we're not together, which we're very sad about. But I think the most expensive hour of podcasting we have ever done, it was less than £5,000 of raw costs. And that was because when Joey came to Greece, which I loved. And I, every time, yes, please. But when you think of how much an hour of, old-fashioned television, or even stuff that you see on Netflix now that isn't sort of drama or whatever costs, you can see why this is appealing.
Yeah, and saves money for huge movies and huge high-scale TV as well. So listen, it is what it is. On that, I'm not going to take a view on it.
Now, Richard, have you got any recommendations?
Yes, we finally saw Marty Supreme, which I just absolutely adored. And it's one of those things that you think, it's been so hyped. And we talk a lot about the Hollywood hype machine and, Timothée Chalamet going on everything. And you're like, oh God, it's so obvious. All this stuff. God, just make good films. You don't have to worry about this. And all of the hype is worth it. It's so terrific. And it's so unusual. And it's the sort of film that they don't make these anymore, but they do. Absolutely loved it. It was in a full cinema as well. And I wasn't a huge fan of Uncut Gems, which is cut from a very similar cloth. I found that too stressful. But it has the same stress levels, but with a performance of such originality and charm by Timothée Chalamet. I absolutely loved it. I'm
away, but I'm seeing it the minute I get back. And I'm very excited about it. He is a proper movie star.
A-list or not?
Oh, A-list, of course. Look at how he... it is, by the way, it's open brilliantly for the type of film it is. I mean, absolutely brilliantly. And he has this extraordinary way of promoting things that is different to other people. And he is a movie star, and he is a movie star that makes young people go and watch movies. So he's a good thing in my book. He's the last movie star. On Thursday, we will see you for a Q&A. Look forward to that very much. And on Friday, for our members, we're talking about... It's the second part of our story about the KLF, who burned £1 million.
And we'll find out why, and if they really did do it. And the answer is yes, they did. See you on Thursday, everyone.
See you on Thursday.